March 1943. Night over the Ruhr. The first thing the crew of D for Dog feels is not fear, it's vibration. At 18,000 feet, the whole Lancaster shivers like it's trying to shake its own wings off. Four Merlins scream at full power. The skin of the fuselage buzzes. Loose tools rattle in the floor panels. Somewhere behind the pilot's seat, a metal mug rolls, hits the bulkhead, and nobody turns to look. Because there's nothing to see. Outside the cockpit windows, there is no moon, no stars, no horizon. Just a solid wall of German night pressing against the glass. The world ends at the edge of the instruments. Faint green dials. A red bulb over the navigator's table. A thin snake of cigarette smoke drifting in stale air. The intercom pops. Navigator to skipper. 3 minutes to first radar belt. Flight Lieutenant Harris doesn't answer. He just tightens his grip on the yoke. He's flown this route too many times. He knows the ritual. 3 minutes of silence. Then the killing starts. Hundreds of kilometers away, in a warm concrete bunker on German soil, a young radar operator leans over a pale, circular screen. A thin green line sweeps around and around. For a heartbeat, the tube is empty. Then a single spike appears. Then three. Then an entire row. At first, he thinks it's clutter. Ground return. Ghosts. Then the marks move. They have direction. Speed. Height. A tight stream. Arrowed straight toward the industrial heart of the Reich. He lifts his headset. Multiple contacts. Bearing northwest. Many. Very many. His controller doesn't ask. Are you sure? Last week, Bomber Command sent 442 aircraft this way. 96 did not come home. Phones begin ringing up and down the network. In frozen fields, men tumble out of barracks and sprint toward searchlights. In darkened gun pits, breech blocks slam shut. Fuses twist with numb fingers. On sleepy airfields, ground crews yank propellers, coax radial engines into smoky, coughing life. The invisible tripwire has been touched. Back in D for Dog, nobody sees the radar screens, but they feel the shift. The wireless operator hunches over his set, headphones crushed into his ears. German voices rattle through the static. Calm, clipped, professional. He catches the words he dreads. Jagdleitung, Nachtjäger, Kurs 190, Höhe 5500. Night fighters. Course. Altitude. They're already being hunted. At the map table, the navigator draws a small cross where the coastline disappeared behind them. England is now just a scribble on paper. Ahead, the red pencil line runs straight into the densest flak belt on Earth. They are inside enemy radar coverage now. Everyone feels it. No one says it. In the tail turret, Sergeant McKay sits alone in his plastic bubble, 20 meters of aluminium and cold air between him and the rest of the crew. He can't see the bunker. He can't see the radar. But he's seen the odds. Tonight, Bomber Command expects to lose 1 aircraft in 20. On bad nights, it's 1 in 5. Not numbers on a chalkboard. Empty chairs in the mess. Mugs that won't be used again. He sweeps his guns left and right, searching for shapes in the black that are just a shade too solid. Down below, the radar operator's voice stays flat as he calls out ranges and bearings. On the plotting table, wax markers slide across a gridded map. Each marker is a bomber. Each slow curve is 7 men drifting toward a city they will probably never see. Fighters to Sector C3. Turn now. Climb. Pilots acknowledge and bank, guided by instruments glowing the same sickly green as the radar scopes that steer them. Up above, the first man to die tonight doesn't know he's been chosen. He sits in the mid-upper turret of a bomber, 10 miles ahead of D for Dog, eyes burning from wind and darkness, bored into numbness. The sky around him is perfectly clean. Then it isn't. A line of white tracer suddenly claws across the night, so close he feels it before he sees it. For one stupid heartbeat, he thinks, meteor. It isn't. The BF-110 that fired it is already rolling away, vanishing back into the dark. The tracer is just a tail on something uglier, a tight burst of cannon shells that rip into the bomber's starboard wing, fuel tanks, and one thin human body. He gets as far as Phi on the intercom. The rest is lost in the blast. From D for Dog's tail, McKay watches it happen. One moment, the aircraft ahead is just a darker smudge in the stream, exhausts glowing dull red. The next, it becomes a ball of white fire so bright he has to look away. Burning fragments shed off in a glittering trail as it falls, spinning into the black below. His throat locks. His hands clamp tighter on the triggers. Mid-upper, you see that? He says, somehow steady. Yeah, the reply comes back. Keep looking. There's nothing else to say. Inside the burning bomber, a pilot fights a dead aircraft long enough for two men to reach the escape hatch. He never makes it out. Tomorrow, someone will rub his name off a board with a thumb. The rest of the stream flies on. They have to. A single bomber turning back alone is just a slow, bright target. If safe still means anything, the safest place for D for Dog is buried deep in this river of aluminium and fear. On the intercom, the lies start. Flak doesn't sound too heavy tonight. Maybe they didn't get a good fix. Maybe the radar's off. Nobody believes a word of it. Every searchlight they've seen in the last month has snapped onto bellies with inhuman precision. Every night fighter that slid out of nowhere already lined up on their blind spot said the same thing. The Germans can see through the dark. The crew doesn't know the phrase radar cross-section. They can't write equations for wavelength and reflection. They just know this. Somewhere down there, behind that black sky, there is an invisible wall made of pulses and echoes and math. And night after night, that wall is killing them faster than the factories they're ordered to destroy. To them, it's not a weapon. It's a law of nature. Like gravity, like cold, untouchable. What nobody on D for Dog can imagine. What no bomber crew in that stream would believe if you told them, is that in a cramped British lab, under flickering fluorescent lights, a tired physicist with ink on his sleeves is about to break that law. He's going to make that wall go blind. And his weapon doesn't look like a weapon at all. It's sitting at his feet in an ordinary cardboard box. A box full of shiny, useless strips of metal foil. The box at his feet doesn't look like it could change anything. Not if you look at the numbers. Because on paper, Bomber Command should already be dead. At the start of the war, the idea seems brutally simple. Build a fleet of heavy bombers big enough to punch straight into the heart of Germany at night. Smash factories, refineries, rail yards. Choke the war machine until it can't move. In 1940, that still sounds like strategy. By 1943, it sounds like math trying to murder you. Each bomber costs as much as a small warship. Each crewman takes a year to turn from farm boy into navigator, pilot, gunner. Each mission burns rivers of fuel and oil the country can barely spare. And the losses are no longer acceptable. They're compounding. In the early days, planners in London tell themselves they can live with 10% losses on a single big raid. It sounds insane, but they wrap it in phrases like strategic necessity and offensive spirit. By 1943, 10% has stopped sounding insane. It has started sounding normal. Some nights, 20% disappear into the dark. On a wall in Bomber Command headquarters, there's a big board that doesn't care about speeches. It cares about chalk. Last month, 1,623 sorties flown, 156 aircraft missing. A staff officer stands there after each major raid, white dust on his fingertips, writing a new number next to the old ones. He knows what those digits mean. So does everyone in the room. Every stroke of chalk is a crew that will not walk into the mess again. 7 names at a time, turned into a 2-digit figure. The language of headquarters softens it. Attrition, operational losses, unsustainable. Out on the airfields, the language is simpler. Did you hear about 42 Squadron? They're gone. In 1940, German night defenses are crude. A few searchlights and flak batteries firing blind, sweeping guesswork arcs through the sky. Bomber crews call it the Hail Mary barrage and joke about it over burnt toast at breakfast. By 1943, nobody jokes about the defenses. Now, there is a chain of radar masts from the North Sea to the Swiss border, feeding information along telephone lines and radio nets. Night fighters don't wander around hoping to bump into bombers. They are guided like bullets. Turn here. Climb now. Roll out. Fire. The bombers are still invisible to the human eye, but they are lit up where it matters, on glowing green scopes in bunkers, where calm voices track them in numbers and angles. The crews can feel it, even if they don't understand the diagrams. They see it in how searchlights don't wander anymore. They snap on and lock like fingers closing around a throat. They see it in the way flak bursts walk up to their altitude with terrifying precision, like someone is turning a dial marked higher, higher, there. They see it in the way night fighters appear behind them, not once a night, but again and again, already in the perfect firing position, as if the pilots can see through aluminium. For every bomber that goes down in a fireball, there are others that stagger home, barely holding together. On one cold morning, a ground crew corporal stands under the wing of a returning Lancaster and just stares. Shrapnel holes pepper the skin from nose to tail. A main spar is nearly chewed through. Fuel drips steadily onto concrete. One gun turret is smashed open like an egg, the seat behind it empty. He reaches up and puts his hand on the torn metal. It feels thin, too thin for the job it's doing. Swiss cheese, he mutters. The pilot climbs down the ladder on shaking legs, boots leaving black smears of soot and oil on the rungs. Somebody hands him a cigarette. His hands tremble too much to light it. Behind him, 5 men climb down. There should be 7. Back in the planning rooms, the air staff try to turn these scenes into graphs and curves. They project forward. If losses stay at this level, the bomber force will shrink faster than factories can replace it. Training schools cannot manufacture experienced crews at the same speed radar-guided flak can kill them. The phrase gets used more and more in meetings. Unsustainable loss rate. It's what men say when they can't quite bring themselves to say, we're sending them to die faster than we're hurting the enemy. But the raids cannot simply stop. If Bomber Command stands down, the factories in the Ruhr and beyond will breathe properly for the first time in years. Steel mills, ball-bearing plants, synthetic fuel works, all of them will run without sirens, without nights when the sky turns orange. So the logic becomes a trap. To shorten the war, the bombers must keep flying. To keep flying, they have to survive. To survive, something fundamental has to change. More escort fighters won't fix it. At night, fighters are blind too. The German night hunters come from below and from the sides, guided by ground controllers, slipping into angles the escorts can't see. More armor on the bombers just makes them heavier, slower, even easier radar targets. New routes? The radar net doesn't care. It sees a stream of metal in the sky and paints it in green. The problem isn't the courage of the crews. It isn't the strength of the airframes. It isn't the quality of the engines. The problem is that invisible wall. Radar. A system that looks into the dark, does not tire, does not get scared, and never blinks at the wrong moment. Every conventional mind that stares at the graphs and operation summaries hits the same concrete wall. You can jam a radio. You can shoot down a fighter. You can't argue with a wave of energy bouncing off metal and coming back. The signal goes out. It hits a bomber. It returns to a dish. End of story. Every new memo, every bold proposal runs into that same first principle. As long as their radar works, our losses will stay like this or get worse. In the language of staff papers, it's almost calm. In the language of the men who climb into D for dog, it means something far simpler. Right now, we are losing this war in the dark. No new paint scheme, no fancy formation, no small hardware tweak is going to bend that line on the chart. The only real way to change it is to do something everyone agrees cannot be done. Make radar stop working. Not once, by luck. Every time the bomber stream crosses the border. In 1943, that sounds like wishful thinking or madness. The experts are unanimous. You can't cheat the echo. For most people staring at those numbers, that is the end of the conversation. For one tired physicist in a cramped British lab, staring down at a cardboard box filled with shiny, stupid-looking strips of metal, it isn't the end. To him, it looks suspiciously like the beginning. The physicist doesn't start with the bombers. He starts with the wall. Because if you strip away the roar of engines and the glow of burning cities, the night war over Europe comes down to one simple question. Who owns the dark? Before radar, the answer is nobody. On a moonless night, even the best pilot can only see a few hundred meters. Searchlights claw at the sky like blind hands. Anti-aircraft guns hurl shells into empty air, firing where they hope the bombers might be, not where they are. It's brutal, but it's also blind. Radar changes that. In concrete bunkers along the coast, the Germans build machines that see with electricity. A transmitter sends out a pulse of radio energy. It races into the night at the speed of light, hits something solid, a cliff, a ship, a bomber, and bounces back. An antenna catches the echo. Electronics measure how long it took to return. Distance, height, direction. On the operator's screen, it all becomes one thing: dots. In 1940, those dots are still a novelty. Radar is young, temperamental, half miracle, half science project. By 1943, it's something else. A wall. Not a single line of concrete and barbed wire, but a layered net of beams and echoes. To headquarters, it's called a belt. To the men who have to fly through it, it feels like a spiderweb you can't see. Long-range sets on the coast first pick up the bomber stream while it's still over the sea. They don't need an exact count, just many, enough to matter. Further inland, shorter-range sets catch them again as they cross the frontier, feeding fresh bearings and heights into filter rooms where women with telephones and men with long sticks move little markers across gridded maps. Above all that, night fighters patrol invisible boxes in the sky. Hunting grounds tied to those plots. When the cluster of bomber dots moves into a box, the controller leans into his microphone. Turn left. Climb. Hold. They're right in front of you. Up in the dark, the pilot still sees nothing, just black. But the geometry is already solved. He's in the right place. He's at the right height. He's behind them. From down in the bunker, it looks almost surgical. The radar operator watches a single fighter dot slide into the flow of bomber dots, linger, then peel away. Minutes later, one of the bomber dots slows, drifts off the stream, and vanishes. No flames on the scope, no falling wreckage, just the quiet erasure of a mark on glass. From the bomber crew's side, it feels like witchcraft or a curse. They fly in total darkness. They see nothing. And yet fighters keep finding them from blind spots they didn't even know existed. Flak bursts walk straight up to their altitude. Searchlights snap onto them like fingers closing around a throat. The physicist knows there's no magic, just physics. And it is brutally one-sided. Radar doesn't get tired, doesn't get scared, doesn't look the wrong way at the wrong time. If the bomber is metal and the pulses keep coming, the echoes will go back to the dish. As long as that is true, the wall stands. The British haven't been stupid about this. Long before anyone hands the physicist a cardboard box of foil, other scientists and officers have already tried to scratch at the wall. They tried jamming, blasting noise on the same frequencies to blind German sets. Sometimes it works. Over one raid, operators report their screens turning into smeared fog, everything washed in hash. For a few precious minutes, the wall flickers. Then German technicians twist dials, shift frequency, tighten filters. The ghostly fog clears. The bomber stream reappears on a cleaner band, picked out in sharp, green spikes. The wall wobbles. It doesn't break. They try new tactics, bending routes, changing height, flying in looser clouds instead of neat streams. Each clever pattern works once, maybe twice. Then German operators learn what that pattern looks like on the screen. The wall adjusts. From the physicist's point of view, none of this is surprising. He knows why radar is so hard to beat. The core equation is cruelly simple. If a wave can leave the transmitter and reach the bomber, it can come back. If it comes back, it can be detected. If it can be detected, you can plot it. You can make that process noisier. You can make it harder. But as long as the wave is bouncing cleanly, you can't make the echo vanish. And bombers are perfect targets. Big, metal, full of long metal shapes inside. Engines, guns, bomb racks, fuel tanks, all the things radar loves. They show up beautifully. The physicist has read the summaries, sat in the rooms. He's heard the same sentence over and over, in different accents, from different mouths. You can't change the fact a bomber is metal, and you can't change how radio waves behave, so you can't change the wall. It isn't cowardice. It's not pessimism. It's just correct. If you stay inside the assumptions. The physicist's problem, or his advantage, is that he's never been very good at staying inside them. On a gray afternoon, long before anyone talks seriously about confusing enemy radar, he sits in a small test room with a lab radar set. Nothing like the tall giants on the coast. This one is squat, ugly, cobbled together from whatever parts his team could beg or steal. They're running calibration tests, the most boring kind of essential work. Point the antenna at a metal pole. Watch the spike on the screen. Move the pole. Watch the spike move. Radar kindergarten. At some point, out of sheer boredom, one of the junior technicians waves his hand through the beam. The screen hiccups. A soft, fuzzy blip. Human. Then the technician, restless, grabs something off a crate, a narrow strip of crumpled metal packing. He holds it up without thinking. The screen reacts. The blip is sharper, cleaner, taller. For 1 second, it looks like a tiny bomber. The physicist's eyes flick to the scope. Hold that there. He changes the pulse, changes the angle, tries again. The strip is small, almost weightless, but to the radar, it looks big. He doesn't get excited. He's trained himself not to. Too many clever ideas have died under fluorescent lights in committee rooms. Still, a thought sticks. If something this small can look that large, he starts to play. On his bench, the experiments look like a child's project. Strips of metal cut to different lengths. Some long, some short, some straight, some twisted. He hangs them on bits of string, spins them, drops them, waves them in front of the radar, watches the trace. Most of what he sees just confirms his equations. Certain lengths light up at certain wavelengths. Get it right, and even a sliver of metal throws back a loud echo. Get it wrong, and a much bigger piece almost disappears into the noise. He fills pages with notes. Somewhere else, on someone else's desk, those notes would look like a waste of a good mind. Scraps and scribbles about junk metal while bombers are burning. He knows that's how it will look. The culture around him worships bigger and better, more power, narrower beams, cleverer receivers. Progress means more complexity. He is doing the opposite. He's looking for a way to break something by making the situation dumber. At this point, he isn't thinking about saving any particular crew in any particular bomber. He isn't visualizing the ruler or chalkboards in headquarters. He's thinking about pulses and echoes and how to abuse them. At the edge of one notebook page, he sketches a stupid idea. Don't make the bombers disappear. Make the sky so loud with fake echoes that the wall goes deaf. Not for one aircraft, for the whole stream. He stares at the sketch and almost laughs at himself. Classic jamming means transmitters, power trucks, special antennas, specialist operators, an arms race of who can shout loudest on the same frequency. What he's drawing is different, passive, cheap, thin strips of metal, cut to just the right length, thrown out into the air. Let the radar pulses hit them. Let them ring like tiny tuning forks. Get enough of them up there, and, on the enemy's screen, you won't see a neat line of bombers. You'll see a blizzard, a cloud of ghost aircraft, every pulse answering from everywhere at once. Not one new machine, not one new circuit, just controlled rubbish in the sky. It sounds ridiculous, like a prank. He can hear, in his head, exactly how some colleagues would react if he walked into a meeting and pitched it straight. We're fighting a scientific war, and your big idea is throwing confetti? So he doesn't walk into that meeting. Not yet. He keeps his test small, refines his numbers, works out how many strips it would take to light up a radar like a Christmas tree, how fast they'd fall, how long a cloud of them would stay thick enough to matter while the bomber stream passes through. While he does that, the wall keeps working. Coastal operators keep calling out ranges and bearings. Controllers keep steering fighters into streams. Chalk dust keeps building on that loss board. On one side, there is a polished system backed by industry, doctrine, and brutal logic. On the other, a tired man with ink on his sleeves and a cardboard box full of metal strips. Freeze the frame there, and it looks like a bad joke. Machine versus scrap. Hard science versus a stupid little drawing in the margin of a notebook. The wall versus one man who thinks at a slightly wrong angle. what the physicist is about to prove, and what almost nobody around him sees yet, is that you don't always have to smash a wall to beat it. Sometimes, if you throw the right kind of noise at it, at the right moment, you can do something even more dangerous. You can make it forget how to see. His idea doesn't start in a cardboard box. It starts in a file. A thin, unimpressive file with his name on the tab and a quiet verdict between the lines. Useful, but not essential. His name is Alan Ward. On paper, he looks like the sort of man you want in a war of gadgets and equations. University medals. A solid thesis on electromagnetic waves that exactly 3 people on Earth have read all the way through. Good marks. Polite references. Not a genius. Not a failure. Comfortably forgettable. In the late 30s, when radar is still a half-secret toy, Alan is one of dozens of young physicists pulled into the British Air Defense Project. They work in drafty coastal shacks and converted country houses, inventing a new kind of eyesight for a nation that knows war is coming. Back then, it feels like adventure. Long nights in cold rooms, coffee that tastes like burnt rubber, chalkboards covered in strange diagrams. If you squint, you can almost see the future through the noise. Every time a new set manages to pick up a test aircraft at a slightly longer range, there's a little cheer. Someone opens a bottle they shouldn't be able to afford. For a few months, everyone feels like a main character. But science in wartime has a brutal habit. It sorts people. Some men keep stumbling into ideas that work. Their sets see farther. Their circuits are quieter. Their graphs show cleaner spikes. Their names rise quickly, pulled upwards by results. Others don't. Alan's work is never quite wrong. It's never quite right enough either. His designs function, but someone else's design functions with fewer components. His clever filter does reduce noise, but not as much as the one the man in the next building just showed the director. His carefully derived paper on antenna lobes lands on a desk 3 days after a simpler, more practical version from another team. The war has no patience for second place. His proposals are approved with small, tight smiles and phrases like, "Interesting, we'll file this for later consideration." Later almost always means never. Over time, the pattern settles. When there's a new emergency, a gap in coverage, a nasty surprise in German equipment, a problem nobody knows how to even define, the same few names get shouted down corridors. Get Robertson. Find Davies. Put this on Collins' desk. Alan isn't one of those names. He's the one who fills in the missing calculations, who stays late to make sure the test stand is actually calibrated, who quietly corrects someone else's algebra in a footnote. People like him are the glue in big projects. Necessary. Replaceable. But he doesn't quit. He doesn't have anywhere to quit to. By 1942, he is in his late 30s, older than most of the brilliant prodigies who now stride around the establishment with the self-confidence of men whose work is visibly saving lives. His hairline has retreated. His suit never quite fits as well as theirs. He has a wife in a small house somewhere inland, a daughter who sends him drawings of airplanes with smiling faces, and a job that looks, from the outside, like the peak of a scientist's career. On the inside, it feels like a waiting room. He sits in back rows during briefings while the star names present their breakthroughs to visiting officers. He watches senior men in blue uniforms nod gravely, ask clever questions, shake the right hands. When the meeting ends, they walk past him without their eyes quite landing on his face. He tells himself it doesn't matter. The work matters, not the credit. He tells himself that often enough, he almost believes it. Then the bomber loss reports start coming in thicker. At first, they are just numbers and memos. Loss is heavy. Radar believed effective. He reads them like any professional, clinically, tracing cause and effect. But as months pass, the numbers stop being abstract. Men from his old school, his university, his street start appearing in the casualty lists. He hears the way the mess hall goes quiet when someone opens a morning paper and sees a squadron photograph framed in black. He knows, with a cold, private certainty, that the technology he helped build is part of this, not as a shield, as the knife. The German radar net, the wall he understands so intimately, is doing its job. Every missing bomber on those reports went up against a system he could sketch from memory. One evening, walking back to his quarters under a low, dirty sky, he passes a group of ground crew from a nearby airfield. Their conversation drifts over the hedgerow. They knew we were coming before we hit the coast. Jerry Radar has to be. They were on us like bad news. He keeps walking, but the words stick. Jerry Radar. The thing that was supposed to be their secret advantage has a mirror version now, turned against men who can't even see it. That is what makes the idea in his notebook more than a curiosity. It makes it an obligation. But obligation doesn't cancel memory. Alan remembers every time he has walked into an office with a new proposal and watched the temperature in the room drop by 2 degrees. He remembers the polite patience in senior officers' eyes, the way they glance at their watches when he starts explaining. He remembers having an early thought about ground clutter half dismissed, only to see a younger, more fashionable colleague present a near-identical idea 3 months later, and being praised for his original approach. He knows exactly how "let's throw shiny rubbish into the sky" will sound. So for a while, he hides. He frames it, even in his own mind, as background work, characterizing reflections, gathering data. Nothing more. He refines his tables. He nails down lengths, densities, fall rates. He fills a cheap cardboard box with strips cut to exactly the sizes his equations demand. He weighs it in his hands, feeling faintly ridiculous. It's light. Too light to change anything. One rain-streaked morning, as he comes into the lab, there's a small commotion in the corridor. A messenger from the Air Ministry has arrived with fresh instructions. There's going to be a conference, another high-level review of countermeasures, another chance, in theory, for clever ideas to be heard. In practice, another parade of the usual suspects. Alan stands in the doorway as the lab chief scans the letter. "They want any proposals with realistic prospects," the chief mutters. "Not wishful thinking, not fairy tales. God help me, there'll be a queue of people trying to sell fairy tales." A couple of the younger men laugh. Alan feels his ears burn. That night, he doesn't go to the mess. He sits alone at his desk, a mug of tea gone cold at his elbow, the box of foil on the floor by his foot like an accusation. He stares at the loss figures pinned to the wall. Last week's raid, 12% missing. The week before, 9%. Projected if nothing changes by year's end. Unthinkable. The numbers don't care about embarrassment. He picks up one strip of foil. It gleams dully in the lamplight, no heavier than a sliver of onion skin. He imagines it caught in a radar beam, ringing with energy, painting a bright lie on a German screen. He hears the argument forming in his head, line by line. He hears the objections, too. What if they copy it? What if it blinds our own sets? What if it doesn't work as well over land? What if we're gambling thousands of lives on a physicist's theory and a box of Christmas trimmings? Some of those are good questions. Some are just fear in a fancy uniform. He turns the strip over in his fingers. On the desk in front of him is a photograph. Every lab has them. A crew in front of a bomber, grinning, trying to look cocky. He doesn't know their names. It doesn't matter. They look exactly like the men he passes every morning on the road into the station. He thinks about the wall. He thinks about dots vanishing off screens. He thinks about chalk on boards. And for the first time in his career, something in him snaps in the right direction. He is tired. He is not stupid. If the worst thing that happens is that people laugh at him in a meeting, then fine. Let them laugh. They're already sending men into a slaughterhouse guided by bolts of electricity he helped discover. He writes the heading on a blank sheet of paper, in a hand that shakes more than he would like. Proposal: large-scale use of resonant foil strips to degrade enemy radar picture. Even the title sounds dry. Good. Dry gets read. He doesn't sleep much. By morning, the proposal runs to several dense pages. No poetry. No grand claims. Just numbers. Graphs. A summary of his tests. The physics of resonance. Estimates of how many strips a bomber could carry. How much sky they could contaminate. The last line is not scientific. Given current and projected loss rates, the controlled deployment of such strips over enemy radar belts presents a risk worth taking. He attaches the report to the standard form, signs his name, and walks it down the corridor toward the lab chief's office. He pauses outside the door for a moment. He knows how this usually goes. The raised eyebrow, the careful nod, the report going onto a pile that no one ever quite gets to the bottom of. He thinks about turning away, taking it back, filing it quietly somewhere safe. Instead, he knocks. The lab chief looks up as he comes in, sees the paper, and sighs inwardly. Another idea. Another man who doesn't realize how crowded the world is with ideas. What have you got, Ward? Alan doesn't give a speech. He just places the proposal on the desk and, for once in his life, looks someone in authority directly in the eye. A way to make their radar see ghosts, sir, he says. Cheap, passive, achievable with existing industry. And I've tested the physics. It works. The chief glances at the title, scanning for the usual warning signs. Radical, revolutionary, if only we had unlimited resources. Instead, he sees numbers, measured results, specific sizes, practical considerations about packaging and release. And, against his will, his curiosity nudges him. Foil strips, he reads aloud. You want to throw foil at Hitler? Yes, sir, Alan says, in very large quantities. There's a tiny pause. It's the sort of pause careers die in. Then the lab chief does something Alan didn't plan for. He picks up the proposal instead of putting it on the pile. All right, he says slowly. I'll send this up with the next batch. No promises. You know how it is. Yes, sir. Alan walks back to his bench, heart hammering harder than it did during any exam he's ever taken. For a long time, nothing happens. The bombers keep flying. The loss reports keep coming. The cardboard box of foil sits in the corner of the lab, gathering faint dust. Nobody calls his name down any corridors. Then, one wet, ordinary afternoon, a message arrives from higher up. The phrasing is formal, dry, easy to miss among a dozen other requests. It contains one sentence that makes Alan read it 3 times. Authorized, Controlled trial of proposed foil strip radar countermeasure using limited number of aircraft over non-critical area. They are not betting the war. They are not even betting a city. But they are letting him try. The wall is still there. The bomber losses are still there. For the first time, so is a crack between the assumptions. And a man nobody thought of as essential is about to put his stupid idea in front of the one thing that has never cared about opinions. Enemy radar. The test isn't glamorous. There are no headlines, no secret briefings with maps spread across oak tables, no generals stabbing cities with silver-topped pointers. On paper, it barely exists. A short paragraph in an operations file, buried between routine notes about fuel allocations and training sorties. Conduct limited trial of foil strip countermeasure over non-critical area. 2 aircraft. Night conditions. Observe and report any measurable degradation in enemy radar performance. Non-critical means exactly what it sounds like. No major cities at stake. No big industrial targets. Nothing that will make anyone important look foolish if it all goes wrong. For the crews, it's just another op. For Alan Ward, it's the first time his idea leaves the safety of paper. He doesn't go with them, of course. The men who dream up devices rarely get to ride along when they're first used. He stays on the ground, where he belongs, under bad lighting and piles of forms. The day of the test, the weather can't decide what it wants to be. Low cloud hangs over the coast like a gray lid. Light drizzle speckles the airfield. On the dispersal point, 2 tired bombers sit with their noses pointed toward the runway, props ticking gently in the damp air as crews strap in. They're not full of bombs tonight. Where the usual payload would be, there are racks of cardboard bundles. Each bundle is tightly packed with the product of Alan's notebook. Thin strips of aluminum foil, cut to precise lengths, stacked like silver noodles. Ground crew don't ask many questions anymore. They've seen too many improvisations. Extra fuel tanks, odd pods, new antennas sprouting from fuselages like metal barnacles. Still, one corporal can't help himself. He slaps the side of a crate marked with a neutral label. Special stores. "What's this lot, then?" he asks, half to himself. "Magic beans?" The armorer shrugs. "Boffin's stuff. Don't look like much, does it? Long as it makes Jerry's aim worse, they can pack the ruddy plane with Christmas decorations for all I care," the corporal says. Up in his office, Alan watches from a window as the aircraft taxi out, tiny and fragile against the gray horizon. He knows the numbers. He knows that tonight, nobody expects heavy flak or coordinated fighter attacks. This is supposed to be safe as operations go. It doesn't feel safe from where he's standing. Each of those cardboard bundles is a bet with lives attached. In another building, in a room full of humming equipment, a small group of radar operators has been quietly primed. Officially, they haven't been told anything. Unofficially, they know this much. Some of ours will be dropping a new kind of countermeasure tonight. Don't adjust the sets. Don't touch the filters. Just watch and write everything down. Across the channel, German radar stations go about their usual business. Coastal sets sweep. Operators call in plots. It's a routine night. No mass raids on the boards. No urgent calls from sector controllers. The bomber stream, such as it is, consists of 2 dots that barely register against the usual background of weather and stray reflections. The plan is simple. The aircraft will fly a straight leg toward the fringe of an enemy radar belt, then turn and run along it, dropping bundles at prearranged points. Enough distance for the strips to spread. Enough time for eyes on both sides to see what happens, if anything happens. In Alan's lab, the wall clock seems louder than usual. He sits at a table with a pot of coffee that has long since given up on being drinkable, a notebook open to a clean page. There's nothing for him to do now but wait for other people to watch his theory try to become reality. He imagines all the ways this could go wrong. The strips could clump together and fall too fast, making a barely visible smear on enemy screens. The wind could shear them off course, leaving the aircraft flying through gaps in their own cloud. The German operators could see the clutter, shrug, and mentally subtract it, the way an experienced man learns to ignore noise. Worst of all, nothing might happen at all. A clean, empty scope. 2 lonely dots. The wall as solid as ever. On the other side of the water, in a German bunker, an operator leans over his console, bored enough to be thinking about his supper. The green line sweeps. A few coastal echoes drift lazily on the tube. A merchant ship. A fishing boat that forgot to come home before dark. A faint, intermittent trace at long range that could be an aircraft, or could be the machine lying. He logs it without much interest. Over the water, the first British bomber hits its initial release point. In the cramped bomb bay, the bomb aimer is doing a very different job tonight. He lies on his stomach, watching not for a target, but for the flick of a cockpit light, the signal from his pilot. "Ready?" comes the voice in his headset. "Ready," he says, hand on the first bundle's release lever. The pilot checks position one more time with the navigator. The wind, the drift, the timing. Everything about the operation is small, measured in miles instead of hundreds of miles, but the discipline is the same. "Now," the navigator says. The pilot clicks his mic twice. The bomb aimer pulls. The first bundle of foil tumbles out into the cold night air. For a moment, it drops like any other dead weight. Then it bursts open, and a cloud of metallic confetti explodes behind the aircraft, caught in the slipstream, spreading, fluttering, falling slowly toward the unseen water below. The crew can't see it. They only see darkness. The bomb aimer arms the next bundle. Second away. Now. More silver spills into the night. Behind them, the second bomber repeats the pattern, staggered by a few miles to spread the effect. On a map, if you could draw it, their paths would look like 2 careful fingers smearing a line of glitter across a black page. In the British radar room, nothing happens at first. A faint contact at range. 2 blips moving sedately along. No sign that anything in the sky has changed. Then one of the screens does something odd. The operator frowns and leans closer. Where there was a clean trace, there is now a fuzziness, a smearing. Little spikes that shouldn't be there begin to pop up along the path of the dots. "Seeing anything?" his supervisor asks, not wanting to lead him. "There's clutter," the operator says slowly. "Moving clutter, like weather, but cleaner. It's following something." On the German side, the reaction is sharper. Their sets are closer, their angles better. The first coastal radar notices a sudden bloom on the scope. Not a single strong echo, not a steady blip, but a patch, a fat, crawling patch that seems to swell and trail. The operator adjusts his gain, trying to sharpen the picture. The patch changes shape, but doesn't go away. He calls his controller. Unusual interference, sector north-northwest. Could be multiple aircraft, or something else. The controller asks the usual questions. "Can you count the individual tracks?" "No, sir. It's..." Messy. They're blending. He doesn't like that word. Messy. Back in England, the British observers start writing faster. Time, 21:17. First signs of extended echo trail behind friendly formations. Pattern consistent with deliberate deployment. Echo persists beyond estimated aircraft position. Alan doesn't see the screens. He just sees the notes as they are relayed by phone and runner, each line dictated in a flat voice by someone trained not to get excited. He feels his pulse in his throat. Trail remains visible for approximately 3 minutes before fading, the report says. During that time, enemy radar picture in that sector appears degraded. Operators report difficulty isolating individual returns. On the German coast, individual men are discovering the same thing in less careful language. That can't be right. Try narrowing the beam. It's still there. Searchlights in that sector swing up, groping for shadows their controllers are no longer entirely sure of. Somewhere overhead, one of the British bombers flies straight through the area it was ordered to contaminate. The pilot waits for the usual sign that someone has him on a string, the sudden, artificial daylight of converging beams, the dull thump of flak feeling its way toward him. Nothing happens. It is still dangerous. He is still over enemy territory. The dark is still full of ways to die. But there is a gap, a softness, a sense, for a few minutes, that the wall is busy looking at something that isn't him. In the bunker, a German operator swears under his breath as the bright smear on his screen grows. What is that? He turns the gain down, then up, tries a different setting. The patch shifts, distorts, but refuses to resolve into neat little dots. The controller leans over. Multiple? Or one big? Can't tell, sir. It looks like a cloud. A cloud of what? The operator doesn't have an answer. Later, in his report, he will write something non-committal about possible anomalous propagation and meteorological effects. It sounds better than, "We didn't understand what we were seeing." Back in England, hours after the aircraft land, Alan sits in a cramped briefing room as the first full account of the trial is read out. The prose is dry. The content is not. Conclusion. Controlled release of resonant foil strips produced large, persistent areas of moving clutter on both friendly and enemy radar sets. The senior officer summarizes. Within those areas, it became significantly more difficult to distinguish and track individual aircraft. He looks up. In plainer English, gentlemen, it made the picture ugly. There are cautious smiles around the table. Ugly is a good word in this context. Ugly means confusion. Ugly means delay. Ugly means fighters turning the wrong way, flak gunners aiming at ghosts. Alan sits very still. This is the moment, he knows, where the room could break either way. Someone could say, "Interesting, but limited use," and the idea would be quietly buried under more urgent projects. A footnote, a curiosity, something historians would find in a file 20 years later and sigh over. Instead, a different question comes. How much can our aircraft carry? The officer in charge of stores answers. Quite a lot, sir. The material is light. Packaging is simple. It would add a small amount of weight, but nothing catastrophic. What about manufacturing? A representative from industry flips through his notes. We could scale up production within weeks. Foil at those thicknesses isn't exotic. We'd need to divert some capacity, but compared to, say, building a new mark of set, it's trivial. The room goes quiet in a different way now. Not dismissal. Calculation. For once, Alan doesn't speak. He's afraid that if he opens his mouth, 30 years of being careful will pour out and ruin everything. The senior officer at the head of the table taps his pen against a blotter, thinking. "We're not talking about a miracle cure," he says finally. "Radar will still work outside the contaminated areas. They'll learn. They'll adapt. But if we can blind their belts for even a few crucial minutes on the nights that matter." He lets the thought hang. Nights that matter. Hamburg, the Ruhr, Berlin. Nights when 1 or 2% fewer losses means hundreds of men breathing the next morning. He turns to Alan at last. "Ward, your numbers held up? The stuff does exactly what you said it would. I won't pretend I like the idea of giving Jerry any hints he can copy, but we're past the point of being delicate." He pauses. "We're going to trial this on a proper raid." A proper raid. Not 2 bombers over non-critical nowhere. Hundreds of aircraft. Thousands of lives. The wall is still there. The loss boards are still there. But for the first time, the question, who owns the dark, no longer has a simple answer. Somewhere in the middle, between bunker and bomber, between pulse and echo, a strip of falling foil has just raised its hand and said, "Me too." By the time they decide to use it for real, the bombers are already dying on paper. The target is not a non-critical area anymore. It's a city, a big one, the kind of name that shows up in speeches and enemy propaganda, the kind of place where industry and civilians are welded together so tightly that you can't hit one without hitting the other. In meetings behind closed doors, men in uniform and men in suits argue over maps. They argue over routes, altitudes, timing. They argue over something else too. Whether they are about to hand Hitler a gift, because if they use Alan Ward's foil trick on a real raid, at full scale, it won't stay secret forever. German sailors will find strips stuck to rigging. Civilians will pick them up in the streets like weird metallic leaves. Technicians will put them on tables and stare. Within weeks, maybe days, German scientists will have their own notebooks full of lengths, wavelengths, fall rates. They could throw the same stuff back at British radar. The wall could go both ways. In one blunt memo, someone puts it like this: "If we do this, we will be telling the enemy exactly how to blind us. Consideration: are we prepared for reciprocal use?" The reply comes back, colder. Current bomber losses already unsustainable. If method reduces losses on key raids, cost of possible enemy adoption judged acceptable. Recommend proceed. Acceptable cost. Those 2 words will never appear in any propaganda film. On the night they choose, the airfields are a different kind of busy. Instead of bombs alone, the loading diagrams for each aircraft now include row after row of slim packages marked with a new code name. Window. Ground crews joke that it sounds like a cleaning product. "Maybe we're going to go over there and polish Jerry's glass," one says, wiping his hands on a rag. "Long as it keeps his bloody guns looking the wrong way," another replies. In one hangar, a briefing officer stands in front of a room packed with crews. The map behind him is covered in colored strings and pins. The red line of the bomber stream curves in from the sea, cuts across German radar belts, dives toward the target city. He goes through the usual routine: routes, turning points, flak concentrations, radio frequencies, weather. Then he points to a small stack of cardboard bundles at the front of the room. "Some of you have already heard rumors about this," he says. "Tonight, those rumors become your job." A murmur runs through the room. "This stuff is called window," he goes on. Inside each bundle are strips of metal foil cut to very precise lengths. When you release them at the proper points, they'll reflect enemy radar pulses and create clutter. Enough of it, we hope, to make it very difficult for them to see you as individual aircraft. He pauses. There's no cheer, just intense silence. He looks them dead in the eye. We have tested it on a small scale. It works. The risk is that the enemy will copy it and use it against us. The decision has been taken that the potential benefit to you outweighs that risk. That last sentence lands harder than anything about altitudes. Benefit to you. In the back row, a tail gunner whispers to his neighbor, "I'll take any benefit they've got," he mutters. "They could throw teapots out the chute for all I care, if it stops Jerry seeing us." The instructions are simple and terrifying in their simplicity. At specific times, crews will begin to throw window out according to a precise schedule. One bundle every minute, or every 30 seconds, or whatever the sheet in their hand specifies. The idea is not one big dump. It's a continuous smear. Turn the clean radar picture of a bomber stream into something that looks like a storm front made of metal. Alan doesn't sit in that briefing. He sees it later, secondhand, in the way men walk past his building that afternoon. There's a different tension in their faces, not the usual grim acceptance that tonight might be their last. That has become background noise by now. Tonight, there is something else layered on top. Hope, carefully kept on a short leash. As dusk falls, the runway lights flicker on, one by one, dimmed for war, but still enough to show the silhouettes rolling forward. The stream builds. Dozens, then hundreds of bombers lumber into the air, climbing into a sky that will, within hours, be full of hot metal and falling things. Deep in the belly of one of them, D for dog, is just another letter in a long, long line from A to whatever the alphabet runs out at. Harris sits at the controls, eyes flicking between instruments and the shrinking strip of runway disappearing beneath them. McKay settles into his turret, the world behind him turning into a smear of fading light and climbing cloud. Somewhere in the fuselage, along with the usual load of destruction, stacks of window bundles sit ready. They look like nothing. Over the North Sea, the stream forms up. From the ground, if you could see it, it would look like an arm reaching out, a long, slow punch at a distant glowing jaw. From inside each aircraft, it's just formation lights and trust. On the German coast, radar operators watch their scopes with growing interest. Tonight is not like the test night. Tonight, the picture is busy. Multiple contacts, long-range echoes building into the familiar, ugly curve that means many bombers coming. Phones ring. Controllers bark orders. Somewhere, a siren starts to wail. The wall is ready. At a prearranged point over the sea, a navigator in one of the leading aircraft checks his watch and nods. Window. Go. The bomb aimer kneels by the chute, yanks open the cover, and pulls the first bundle's release. Unlike bombs, there is no weighty sensation, no sudden rise as tons of steel leave the aircraft. The bundle is light. Its departure is almost imperceptible. It falls, bursts, and the air behind the bomber turns silver. Then the next, and the next. In the stream behind, other aircraft begin their own sequences, slightly offset. Bundles tumble out of bellies and hatches. Some are tossed by hand, some dropped from racks. Within minutes, the invisible corridor the stream is flying through is seeded with millions of tiny reflectors, each one a little lie waiting for a pulse. In the British radar rooms, operators see the effect develop in real time. The clean, narrow return that always used to mark the bomber stream starts to fray at the edges. A faint haze appears, then thickens. Clutter increasing behind friendly formations. One notes calmly. Echo extending beyond normal geometries. In the German bunkers, it's not calm. Every set facing the incoming stream begins to suffer the same strange disease. Where once there were lines of discrete dots, there are now smeared patches. Bright boiling masses that grow and drift and split. The operator who saw the first test weeks ago feels the same unease in his gut, only multiplied tenfold. This isn't weather. This isn't just one of those nights. He twists the gain. The patches remain. He narrows the beam. The patches sharpen at the edges, but they don't resolve into neat tracks. He tries to pick out a single bomber to follow. Every time he thinks he has one, it blurs into the noise. Report, his controller snaps. There is. Heavy interference, the operator says, sweat prickling under his headset. The picture is, he searches for the right word, ugly. Across the network, other operators echo the same complaints in their own ways. Multiple spurious returns. Cannot distinguish individual aircraft. Possible large formation, or multiple formations, or we don't know. That last thought stays unspoken. The controllers do what controllers always do when the tools in front of them stop behaving. They guess. Night fighters are vectored into sectors based on half-trustworthy plots. Some are sent too high, some too low. Some chase ghosts that only exist because a piece of foil happened to tumble through a beam at the wrong moment. A pilot lines up on a bright echo that his controller swears is a bomber. There is nothing there. He burns fuel and time turning circles in empty black air, growing more frustrated with every minute. On the ground, flak batteries fire at quadrants of sky that, on paper, ought to be full of targets. The shells burst dutifully. Most of them burst alone. Up in the stream, Harris keeps waiting for the usual signs that they have hit the belt. He's flown into German radar before. He knows the script. First the calls on the wireless, a different kind of tension in the German voices. Then the glow of searchlights sweeping the sky, looking random at first, then tightening. Finally, the brutal white spear of one beam locking onto a bomber, and the pack closing in. Tonight, the searchlights do come on, but they don't seem to agree with each other. Their beams swivel and cross, painting great white fans over patches of nothing. A few do catch bombers, and when they do, the flak in that area suddenly gets very personal. Men still die. The sky is not safe. But D for dog flies for long stretches through ragged cones of light without ever being caught in the center. In his turret, McKay notices something he can't quite put into words. Usually, by this point in the run, he has seen at least one night fighter slide into view, too close for comfort. A dark shape against a slightly less dark sky, guns already sparking. Tonight, he sees fewer. Still some. Enough to keep every muscle in his back tight. Enough to remind him that foil doesn't stop bullets. But fewer is a feeling he can taste. Below, past the city's outskirts, the bomb bay doors open on hundreds of aircraft. What happens next is everything Alan Ward never drew in his notebooks. The target is not an equation. It is a vast sprawl of streets and factories and homes that, over the course of the night, will be turned into a single, unnatural element. Fire. Bombs fall. Buildings break. People die. Nothing about Window changes that part of the story. If anything, by protecting more aircraft long enough to reach the release point, it may make the destruction worse. In the glow, that rises from the burning city, in the raging updrafts that rock the bombers on their way home. There is no sign of narrow aluminium strips drifting down through the smoke. But in the cold numbers written on boards the next morning, those strips are everywhere. At Bomber Command, the loss figures come in. Expected, based on previous raids of this size and depth, is a butcher's bill that would make any sane planner flinch. Actual, much lower. Still horrific. Still too many names on lists, but not what the wall predicted. Analysts try to find other explanations. Weather, route, enemy fuel shortages. They factor those in. The gap doesn't go away. In German reports, a new theme appears in dry, bureaucratic German. Interference of unknown origin. Severe difficulty in tracking enemy aircraft. Possible use of organized reflective material. Somewhere, a German physicist stares at a handful of captured foil strips and begins his own calculations. The wall is learning. It will adapt. It always does. But so will the men on the other side. In a lab in Britain, Alan Ward flips through the first full report from the raid. At the section where loss rates are compared with previous operations of similar scale, he stops. For a long moment, he doesn't move. He thinks of the faces in squadron photographs. He thinks of chalk that didn't get used on the board last night. He knows the cost on the ground below those flight paths. He knows that every man who made it home on the back of his idea did so while people burned. There is no clean victory here, just trade-offs. But for a man whose file once said, useful but not essential, one fact stands out in the ink. He changed the math. For one night, in one sector of sky, the answer to who owns the dark was not just radar, or guns, or physics. It was also a quiet physicist with ink on his sleeves, and a rain of metal strips that made a supposedly perfect wall blink. For a few weeks, the war behaves the way Alan hoped. The loss boards show numbers that make men in Bomber Command rub their eyes and check again. Not miracles, not zero, but less. Enough less to feel like someone has leaned on the scales. On the German side, the first reactions are a mess of confusion and pride. Operators complain about nights when the picture goes to pieces. Controllers curse the interference. Night fighter pilots come back angry, swearing they were sent into empty sky, while somewhere else, undisturbed, the real stream slipped by. A few careful minds see something else, not an accident, a pattern. In one radar station, a technician pins a strip of captured foil to a corkboard above his bench. It is flimsy, pathetic looking, too thin to be armor, too soft to be a weapon. He measures it anyway, its length, its width. He notes the radar frequency they use on that set. He does the same math Alan once did, long before anyone called it window. He gets the same answers. This is not scrap, he says to his superior. It's tuned. In quiet, the Germans repeat the same process the British went through, only faster. They don't have to invent the idea. They only have to confirm it works. Within a short time, the term duple appears in their own paperwork, their word for the same shimmering rain of lies. The wall, which once belonged to them alone, now faces a kind of civil war. Radar versus radar. Foil versus foil. In London, this is exactly the nightmare some men predicted in those early memos. German aircraft could, in theory, dump their own chaff clouds in front of British coastal radar. Their bombers could slip behind bouncing echoes just as easily. For the moment, they mostly don't. There are reasons. They are already losing the strategic bombing war over Britain. Their raids are smaller, less frequent, more dangerous. Their industry is under heavier strain. They have fewer chances to experiment. The British, by contrast, are sending out great rolling rivers of bombers whenever the weather and fuel allow. That gives them something even more valuable than a clever idea: repetition. Window becomes part of the drill. Night after night, streams go out carrying bundles. Men who once looked at the cardboard packages with suspicion now treat them like parachutes, something you would be mad not to have. On one airfield, a young pilot glances at a load sheet that years earlier would have looked insane. Tons of bombs, thousands of gallons of fuel, and somewhere in the margins, a neat little line. Window, full load. He grins without humor. "We're flying a scrapyard," he mutters. His navigator shrugs. "If it keeps us off Jerry's Christmas tree, I'll fly a bloody tin factory." In the labs and offices that spawned it, Window stops being an oddity and becomes a logistics problem. How many strips does each bomber need to carry to maintain a good curtain over the whole route? How finely do you space the drops? How do you brief crews so they don't all start too early or too late? Can you optimize lengths for different enemy radar bands? The questions are fiddly, technical, almost boring. All signs that a once radical idea has survived long enough to become standard. Alan Ward, to his mild surprise, is no longer invisible in corridors. People nod to him now. They know his name. A few of them have read his proposal and pretend they knew from the start that it was going to work. He doesn't believe them, but he lets them talk. He still spends most of his time at a desk, adjusting tables, answering questions. How would Window behave over mountains, over coastlines with lots of natural clutter, in mixed formations with different aircraft types? He writes careful, precise answers. At night, when he is alone, he thinks about the other half of the system, not the wall, the men, the radar operators who once had a clean, almost elegant picture and now live in permanent mess. On one of those nights, somewhere in Germany, a veteran operator sits in front of his console with his head in his hands, listening to the soft hum and crackle of a system that no longer behaves like it used to. He has learned to recognize Windows' signature. It arrives on his screen like a storm front, not steady, not random. A crawling, living thing that moves with intent. The first time he saw it, he panicked, reported anomalous propagation, blamed it on weather, sunspots, anything that sounded scientific enough to hide the truth. Now, months later, he can't lie to himself. "This is the English," he tells a junior, tapping the smear with a pencil. "They are drawing on our glass." He has adapted as best he can. He learns to look for small regularities inside the chaos, the slightly stronger blip that might be the leading edge of a bomber stream, the places where the cloud never quite extends. He guesses more. He is wrong more. At the same time, higher up, German tacticians begin to change the way they use their radars. They layer more sets. They combine information from different frequencies. They build primitive filters to try to strip out anything that doesn't move like a solid target. The wall is not what it was in 1943. It is more jagged now, leaky in places, too noisy in others. It still kills. It always kills. But its claim to perfection is gone. On the British side, there is no illusion that Window is a permanent cheat code. In one meeting, a senior officer spells it out. "Gentlemen, this is not magic. It is a window, not a door. It buys us confusion and delay. It buys some of you time to get in and out. It will not do the bombing for you. It will not stop every night fighter. Use it properly, and it will tilt the table in your favor. Use it badly, and it will just make an untidy picture. In quiet corners, some men resent it for another reason. By making it easier for more aircraft to reach the target, Window has sharpened the knife edge between military and moral questions. The firestorms over cities like Hamburg are not caused by foil, but foil helps more bombs arrive on target. In a different kind of report, far from laboratories and radar rooms, someone writes a line that will never be shown to crews. Improved survival rates for bomber streams correlate with increased destruction on the ground. Alan reads that line once. He closes the file and goes outside to smoke a cigarette he doesn't really want. In later years, when people like him are very old, and people like McKay and Harris are mostly names on memorials, historians will try to draw clean arrows between invention and consequence. They will argue about whether Window shortened the war, whether it saved more lives than it cost, whether the nights when it worked too well were justified. Alan won't live long enough to hear all of those arguments. He will see one thing, though, that amuses and saddens him in equal measure. Chaff, his ugly, improvised reign of lies, becomes normal, not just in that war, but in every war after. Jet fighters will carry cartridges that spit out clouds of metal strips when a missile locks on. Naval ships will fire rockets that explode into glittering decoy clouds to draw enemy radar away. Pilots who weren't born when Hamburg burned will pull a lever marked Chaff and watch their screens fill with the digital equivalent of the blizzards Alan sketched in pencil. Most of them will never know the name of the man who first wrote resonant foil strips on a drab piece of paper. They will just know that when the warning tone screams in their headphones and the threat symbol lights up, they have one more switch they can throw to make the world a little more confusing for the thing trying to kill them. In that sense, the answer to who owns the dark will never again be as simple as it was before radar. It's not the wall. It's not the bombers. It's not even the technology itself. It's whoever is willing to think wrong about it at the right moment. On a quiet post-war afternoon, Alan walks through a city that was once on target maps and is now just a place where children push bicycles and old women carry shopping bags. He passes a shop window full of cheap, shiny tinsel for some holiday. Thin strips of metallic plastic catch the light, fluttering in a draft every time the door opens. For a second, his stomach drops. The image on the glass is too close to something burned into his brain. Clouds of foil tumbling in searchlight beams, radar screens blooming with noise, cities burning under them. Then the moment passes. He stands there a little too long, watching the strips sway. To everyone else, they are decoration. To him, they are proof of a dangerous truth that took far too many lives to learn. Sometimes, the thing that breaks a perfect system is not a bigger hammer or a smarter machine. It's a stupid-looking idea in the hands of someone no one thought was essential. A cardboard box full of nothing dropped into the sky at the right time, and a wall that never quite works the same way again.